So if one of your kids has gone to school today dressed as a Little Miss character, it can only mean one thing. Today is World Book Day, and in honour of World Book Day, I wanted to share all of the books that I read last year for anybody who might be interested. The Goodreads total I was aiming for was 50 books. I actually read 33 books. Out of the 33 books I read, 10 were fiction, 14 were non-fiction linked to my spiritual practice, 3 were poetry, 3 were self-help, and 3 were art books. So the fiction first. Out of the 10 fiction, 4 of them were kids' books, and I love reading kids' books. The first takeaway for this is if you don't read kids' books and you're an adult, then don't discount them. Kids' books, young adult books, they hold some of the greatest storytelling, I think, where all is possible and it hasn't become less magical for an adult ear. I think if you are at all magical or love whimsy or just like other worlds where everything is possible, children's literature and young adult literature holds many, many treasures. One of these treasures, which I loved, was the first book in a series by Caro King. This is The Seven Sorcerers, where Nin gets her brother stolen by the bogeyman and inadvertently enters a parallel world where all these creatures live, including the bogeyman and including a vicious ruler who she has to take on to try and save her brother. It is really scary at places. I won't let my 12-year-old read this because I think it will give them nightmares. It gave me nightmares and I'm a grown adult. It got really dark and I didn't even realise at first that this was a kid's book. The writing's brilliant. It's just a fantastic read. I loved it. Don't stop reading children's books. Life lesson implemented. Another kids' book I read was this one. This was recommended by the lovely Lisa Pepez, A Game of Fox and Squirrels. I think if you have any trauma in your past or any surprise events that just rock your world, this book doesn't shy away from dealing with the aftermath of that, the emotional aftermath. It follows the story of 2 girls who have had an extreme family breakup and they go and live with their aunt in the countryside, where one of the girls is given an old-fashioned children's card game that starts to come to life, and all of these characters start to call her out into the woods. This gets dark at times. It pulled at my heartstrings, but I loved it. Decks of cards are not just games. There is magic in the woods, and children's fiction holds answers to big adult issues. Life lesson implemented. And then 2 books, oh my gosh, Be Still My Mama's Beating Heart, were read to me by my little boy. He read this series to me. This one is book 2. This is Future Rat Boy by Jim Smith. If you have any young boys in the house and you're trying to encourage them to read, Jim Smith and this series is wonderful. We read this book, which is book 2 of 3, at the end of the year. The start of January, we read the final book, which literally tears your heart out. It saw both of us absolutely beside ourselves, sobbing. What a ride. Loved it. And then another book that Busby read to me was also a book that ripped our hearts out, left us in tears. That's Perigee and Me. We had the great honour to meet the author of this book at a children's festival that we go to called Just So. The book was wonderful. Again, a great read for boys and girls and adults alike. Always say yes to the opportunity to have a story read to you. It's magical, it's wonderful, and it's probably going to become the most treasured memory of a lifetime. Life lesson implemented. So there were 4 kids books. There were also 4 manga books. Death Note, the Black Page edition, I love. He finds a notebook dropped by a death god that when he writes people's names in it, they die. And it follows his lived human experience of just what to do with the notebook and how it begins to change him. I loved it. Then I started The Children of the Whales, Volume 1. There were so many volumes in this manga series. This is a proper world building series of books about people on a strange island. They've just had their world rocked, and it left me wondering what on earth was going to happen next. There are violent bits in this, which when you read it accompanied with pictures, it's really quite shocking. I bought the next 2 books in the series for Christmas. Let's just wait and see. The jury's out on this one. But this one I loved. This is the book Orange, and again, there's death involved in this. It's a group of school children who get letters sent to them from their future selves to try and change the course of events to save the life of one of their classmates. Pulls at the heartstrings again. There are 3 volumes in this. Book 2, the complete collection, is really impossible to find anywhere. So I've kind of stopped at book 1, waiting to be able to find the 2nd volume. Read something you never thought you'd read. It can open up whole new worlds for you. Life lesson implemented. But hands down, my favourite manga book for last year was this one, which is just a really gentle story about a map maker who draws maps. It follows his time walking out of the house, just going on walks, counting his steps in order to be able to draw maps, and it just follows individual walks and finds places that he comes across new people, new sights. It shows the power of a simple walk, of how a simple walk can expand your world and your connections. How adventures, they don't need to be grand, expensive adventures. How the small adventures of life can impact. As somebody trying to overcome being scared to go out the house, this was comforting, it was healing, it was lovely. It gave me permission to step out of the house without having to plan a grand adventure. It took the pressure off me and I loved it. Life-changing adventure can be simple. One step in front of the other is powerful. And the last 2 fiction books, which were adult fiction, was Octavia E. Butler, Wild Seed, which is the story of a immortal, a godlike, shape-changing creature in the world of humans, and how he controlled and shaped the destiny of the humans around him, but of his meeting then with a second immortal and their journey together. There is more in the series. I have the 2nd book on my bookshelf ready to be read. I loved it. Octavia E. Butler's writing is fabulous. She's amazing. So I loved that one. Dream big, because all is possible. Life lesson implemented. And then I read Wicked, Gregory Maguire. Now, if you've seen the musical Wicked, it is not the same. I know that because my daughter went to see Wicked, the musical, for her birthday last year. When she came back and she told me the plot, I thought that's completely different. The ending was different. Some of the key points of the whole plot were different. And I can see why they changed it, because this gets dark. It's by Gregory Maguire. Of course, it's the story of the Wicked Witch of the West from The Wizard of Oz. And you will never, ever, ever view The Wizard of Oz ever the same ever again after reading this book. In January, I also finished reading the 2nd book, the sequel, Son of a Witch. Again, equally dark and brilliant. Don't believe just because you've seen the film, the TV show, or the theatre production that you know the book. Life lesson implemented. Oh, and let's look after our animals. So those were my 10 fiction books, a mixture of manga, a mixture of kids books, a mixture of really powerful adult writing as well, and I love them all. In the self-help category, there were 3 books. One book I was not really impressed with. It was called The 4 Elements. It's already at the charity shop, so here's a picture here now. I can't even remember what it was about, which kind of says a lot. It was 4 things that you must do in life to get on. It just didn't inspire. However, these 2 books by Ryan Holiday really did inspire. Ryan Holiday, one of the best known Stoic writers of today. I have been on Ryan Holiday's email list for a long time, and he introduced me to the writing of Marcus Aurelius, but his own books are fabulous. I got this down off the shelf just because it sat on my shelf for a long time unread. I wasn't even sure what it was about. It was brilliant. I love it. It introduces you to the idea of stoicism. I think I am a stoic at heart. We're all going to be dead soon, right? So let's chill. Let's learn from mistakes. Let's just get on and do. Life lesson implemented. The minute I finished it, I picked this book up. Equally as brilliant. I loved both of them. I've told my kids they must read them. They're must-read books. I loved them. Be thankful for the challenges because they're the signposts for where to go next. Life lesson implemented. Now, the poetry I read, I do have to push myself to read poetry. I find it hard to read. I can't just relax into poetry. I always want to know, well, what does that line mean and what does this line mean? And I think embracing it as just a painting of words is very hard for me to do. This book is a case in point. I couldn't just read the poems and relax into them. Each poem, I had to find a whole study notes online for each poem that I read. So this book took ages to read because I was reading other people's essays around each poem to make sure I understood it. It sometimes makes reading poetry better for me. It sometimes kills it dead in the water. I still don't know how I feel about these poems and reading poetry. I think I liked it. It was an experience. The same thing applies to Audre Lorde's poems in The Black Unicorn. Again, I find it tricky to read. I'm so glad I've read both of these, but I just feel like an imposter when I read poetry, but surprisingly not when I write poetry, which just doesn't make any sense to me. Somebody make that make sense. But this book by Max Porter, it's kind of like poetry with a story running through it. It's the story of a father with 2 boys who have just lost their mom, and a crow comes to them and they all connect with this crow as their lost mother or wife. A heartbreaking, heart-wrenching. It made me cry. I think I found it easier because there was a story element running through it, and I loved it. I loved it. So poetry reading, I do want to develop the skill. It is a skill. It's a skill I don't have. It's a skill I don't know how to acquire. So I will just keep reading. Reading is a skill set. Don't give up on genres just because it's difficult. Life lesson implemented. 2 more categories. So these are the art books that I read. I started the year with the glorious Kim Krans of the Wild Unknown and the Archetypes deck and the Animal Spirit Oracle. Fantastic artist. This is a graphic memoir by Kim Krans, and this one, literally, I could have written it myself because her words are my words. Her lived path is also my lived path. In this memoir, she talks about falling into the grip of an eating disorder following divorce, which is exactly the path that I am currently living and have been living for the last 4 years. She creates this a retreat where she is just trying to piece together the shattered elements of her life destroyed by this eating disorder and the grief of her divorce. And the pages are just heart-wrenching. All the emotions that are poured into this book I recognise, I relate to, that sort of chaos and that desperation. I just found this book so powerful, and I am so grateful for Kim Kranz for writing it. I loved it. Inspiring, not only for recovery work, it's inspiring to feel that you're not alone, but also for anybody interested in journaling and putting more visual elements into journaling on a practical level. What an inspiration this book is. How to throw images and doodles and scribbles and pictures and words together in a journal. I loved it. Journaling is many different things. Write it down, get it out, create something with the pain. Life lesson implemented. Kind of diary journal as well was this one, the Diary of Frida Kahlo. This one is just pure magic, because not only do you get the actual diary of Frida Kahlo to flick through and to look at, with all of the paintings that she put in the diary as well. So there's a full colour reproduction of the diary at the start of the book, which is just such a honour to get to flick through. But at the back of the book then, in black and white, you get the translation of the diary with commentary. So all of those pages that you've just had the pleasure of flicking through are all reproduced smaller in black and white with a commentary and a translation of them. So you actually get to read and understand the words and the life of Frida in her own words. And her own words kind of make you realise how unique and quirky and eccentric and wild she was as a woman and an artist. I loved it. It felt like stepping onto holy ground for me reading this. Embrace fully what's unique about you. Life lesson implemented. At the end of the year, I bought this little book for part of my Christmas present stash, and I sat on a cold December day while all the kids are playing with their Christmas presents and read this curled up under a throw. This is about the life and works of Grandma Moses, a self-taught American folk art painter, and it was magical. Her art is magical. I love folk art anyway. Hearing about her life was magical. She didn't even begin painting till she was 70. She lived till she was 101. But if ever a story told you it's never too late to follow your dreams, it's the amazing story of Grandma Moses. If you are into art, if you love folk art, or even if you are of a certain age and feel like life has passed you by, go and have a look at the life and story and art of Grandma Moses. You won't regret it. You're never too old. Life lesson implemented. Then finally, the last 14 books that we get to are the books that are linked to my spiritual practice. So they're tarot based books, and they are kind of witchcrafty based books. Now, the tarot books, of course, I've read lots and lots of tarot deck guidebooks. I have included 3 tarot guidebooks, really. They're the tarot guidebooks that I've read over and over and over again through last year, or that stayed with me and I was constantly working through. So then I've only counted the guidebooks that were with me for a long time. So the first one, which hardly left my side last year, the Dreams of Gaia Tarot Guidebook. This is gorgeous. It's really in depth. Of course, the Dreams of Gaia is a system all in its own right. I really wanted to understand all the cards in the system. Read it over and over again. In deep dives, I've referred to all the cards over and over again. I loved it. It's got a special cupboard in my heart where the words are locked away under special times. Another guidebook that I've put on my list is the guidebook by Rachel True for the True Heart Intuitive Tarot, another deck that I deep dived with last year. This book is written very much like a autobiography in places, because the majors all have links and stories to her own life. She kind of matches the energy of the majors to things that happened and memories that she's got of her own life. I only wish that she would have carried on and done it in the minors as well, because it was really lovely to read. The deck that I deep dived with was the Osho Zen, and I spent a lot of time working through this guidebook, so I've put that on my reading list as well. Read on repeat if needed. Life lesson implemented. The other tarot book that I'm counting in with these last 14 are the Practical Tarot Techniques book by Marcus Katz and Tally Goodwin. It takes learning the tarot away from individual card meanings and opens it up wider beyond individual card meanings. It talks about like creating spreads or working with querents, formulating questions, answering questions, using tarot in a business setting as well. So it's slightly wider than a book that just tells you card meanings, and for that I find that a really useful read. Don't get blinkered in your learning. Read for a broad vision too. Life lesson implemented. Links as well with decks was this book that I read about the Magician's deck, a very different sort of deck. I've read this a few times as well because this system is massively different as well. I haven't yet worked out how I want to use this deck, although I do know I want to keep it, but I'm also working through this book as well. So there's a magic course that goes with the Magician's deck. These two together I'm classing as one book. This I'm still working through. This is textbook. There are lessons in this to work through. It's interesting if you're into magic and tarot. It's a really interesting deck, which I haven't worked out yet. Magic often takes time. Don't be afraid to put in the work. Life lesson implemented. A great beginner's book. Magical Power for Beginners by Deborah Lipp. Now this is the book that I wish I'd have read first of all. It's the book that talks about the how-to and how to practically use energy and how to formulate a spell and why something works in a spell, what would make it work, manipulating, using, raising, sending energy, why you would do it, how you would do it, step by step. A must read if you are new in witchcraft. I find this incredibly useful. As you can see, I loved this book. Understanding how energy works is life-changing. Life lesson implemented. I also love this one, Goddesses in Older Women, Becoming a Juicy Crone. This book is aimed at 50+ women, of which I am one of them, and it talks about the goddesses and the archetypes that come into play in your crone years. It links different goddesses and their stories and how they would apply to you as a crone. It was fantastic. If you're over 50, read it, you'll love it. You still count, you can still bring things, you are still a goddess. Life lesson implemented. Another book which I loved, which is a book in letter format, was written by Ray Beth Hedgewitch, A Guide to Solitary Witchcraft. The letters within this book, she wrote to 2 people who were asking her questions about stepping into witchcraft, and they were her lessons and letters that she wrote to them to explain what to study next, what to do, why they were doing it. And then she realised that this body of letters were actually really useful for anybody, and they got published in this book. I loved it. Other people's teaching can teach you too. Life lesson implemented. The last 4 books I want to talk about were linked to my own personal deity practice with the Celtic gods and goddesses. So we're talking Bridget, we're talking the Morrigan, and we're talking the Dagda. I read this book, which is the full English translation of the Cathmage Turid, which is stories of the Morrigan and the Dagda. It's tricky, but it's vital, I think, to go back to source materials, and I'm really pleased that I worked through this one. Always go back to source in reading and in healing. Life lesson implemented. The Dagda came into my life last year, so this was a book that I managed to find. It's a pagan portals book about the good god of Ireland, the Dagda. I loved this one as well. It was a real clarifying book for why the Dagda had stepped forward. Don't reject the divine masculine just because you've had horrific experiences with men in reality. Life lesson implemented. But my hands down favourite 2 books of last year were these 2. Bridget by Courtney Webber and The Book of the Great Queen by Morpheus Ravenna, which is a book about the Morrigan. You can see that this one literally blew my socks off by how many annotated notes I've got on it, because this book clarified for me 35-40 years of occurrences with the Morrigan before I even knew that I was on a path with the Morrigan, and why certain things had happened through my life. There were so many aha moments in this book. It is just off the scale. Halfway through reading this book, I also got a pull to this book because Bridget had stepped forward as well, and I couldn't understand why Bridget had turned up, to be honest, why the Morrigan had pushed Bridget into the mix. I do talk about this in my Bridget video, which I will link at the end. But these 2 books read together were earth-shattering for me, and I loved them. If you have any interest in either of these 2 goddesses, I highly recommend both of these books. Have faith that the answers will eventually come, and the mysteries of life will at some point become clear. Trust your intuition. Look for magic in the everyday. Those small whispers are some of the key words you'll hear in life. Life lesson implemented. There is a time for war, and then there is a time for healing. Life lesson implemented. So those are the life lessons of my reading list of last year. I challenge you now to look through your reading list and to integrate some of the lessons or the key points out of the book, and to integrate it into your being and into your life. Looking forward to 2022. What's next? There's plenty coming next. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye.